Thank you. But the biggest issue impacting Black and brown students is not curriculum or facilities. It's access to authentic relationship and connection. In 2019, Darling Hammond summarized a consensus in the research. Adults' ability to build strong relationships with students correlated in positive outcomes in school. And if you ask most educators what's the best part of their job, well, even more than summers off, I know, right? You're gonna hear some iteration of building relationships with students. Yet, for our Black and brown students, these positive relationships are occurring less frequently and they're lower quality. So, are we supposed to believe that the best part of the job only applies to certain students, certain children? Because I don't. But I believe that at the root of these poor relationships is more than just unconscious bias or the subconscious beliefs that impact the way we feel and think about others. Unconscious bias does impact your decisions, but when it comes to relationships, the most dangerous actions are the ones you don't have a choice about. So today, we're gonna explore the role of habits in driving the actions sabotaging your relationships. I'm gonna share some stories, some moments from my life that shifted the way I think about habits, relationship, and ultimately myself. My story starts with Elle. Elle was an avid reader with an infectious laugh who transferred into my class just after winter break. Now, officially, I had him for history and English, which was what I taught. Unofficially, I had him for everything else. And that was cool with me because as a special education teacher in a therapeutic program, pivoting was part of the job. We spent a ton of time together, and in terms of relationship, by every metric I had, I would have said, yo, I am killing it. Right up until the day where I sat at the long end of an oak table in a room as quiet as this one, save two sounds: the old clicking of the school radiator and the muffled sobs of a mother collapsing in grief. You see, apparently more had been going on than I knew, and Elle was being institutionalized as a result of domestic violence. And even as I say that, the question echoes back up. How could you not know? We talked every day. We played basketball during lunch. He even stayed after school to make sure that all of his assignments were A's and B's, and I still failed him. Because despite my best intentions, I hadn't addressed the biggest hurdle to authentic relationship: the unconscious habits that I did every day. You see, my default habits, they steered me away from vulnerability, because that's not how I learned to associate with Black men. And even though consciously I knew that I was connecting with a student, given enough cues, or more aptly, just the right cue, I reverted back to habits that I learned years earlier, after the school day ended, but before the streetlights came on. Some of y'all might know them too. Reach for a dap, never a hug. Tell a joke when listening gets too hard. Reply with a yeah, but, because the last word matters. See, that day, I wasn't ready to adjust my habits. And because he looked like me, I didn't even question if I had to. So as a result, I couldn't give him the relationship he needed. Your brain is a miracle of efficiency. And once you have a reliable solution, you don't waste any more time or energy refining it. In fact, your brain is probably the earliest adopter of the phrase, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But what does this look like in your daily context? Well, think about the first time you had to get to a new job. You probably used the GPS or printed out directions if you're old school. But after you're working there for a while, when it's time to go to work, your only conscious decision is, do I go or do I call in sick? You're not thinking about the best route to take or which turn comes next. In fact, you can perceive your conscious brain as a a preoccupied co-pilot that's not gonna help you navigate unless you interrupt it or you hit a detour. But some of you might not be convinced because that was like a little, right? But I got a little bit more time. So I'm gonna ask one more question, okay? Can you just raise your hand if you actually came here to learn something new? Okay, well, here it is. I'm betting most of you didn't think about which hand you were going to raise. That is the impact of habit on a single decision. In The Power of Habit, Duhigg explains how habits drive 40% of our decisions, just like they drive us to work each day or pick a hand to raise. And for an educator in a classroom, this translates to a minimum of 2 decisions per minute. It's actually quite ingenious for our brains to let habits handle the small stuff. I mean, we've created our own built-in personal assistant, right? But like a personal assistant with no authority, habits can't do anything they haven't done before. So now, I'm gonna ask you another question. You don't have to raise your hand, you don't even have to answer this out loud, but you do have to answer it honestly. Where did you first learn to build relationships? Was it in your family? Was it in your neighborhood? Was it with some other community that reflected your identity back at you? Because in 2023, the Pew Research Center found that 60% of all adults and 3 in 4 white adults say that all or most of their close friends reflect their same race or ethnicity. Habits that are built inside of these insulated communities, they can't build bridges across class and culture. And as educators, too often we judge our habits of relationship on the merit of past success, even if that success was only in building relationships of sameness. Then we have the audacity to turn around and say, yeah, this is good enough to use with diverse students. The National Center for Educational Statistics tells us that 80% of teachers are white, a number that has barely budged in the last decade. And I want to say this explicitly while I'm on this red dot. There is no school PD focusing on your unconscious habits, sabotaging relationships with Black and brown students that they were never built to reach. That work is on you. Because the danger of unconscious habits is that they erase the uniqueness of the student in front of us and replace it with the person or situation that caused that habit to form in the first place. Now, let me tell you about a time where relying on habit would have meant the end of a relationship that was and still is very important to me. We're gonna talk about H, because H was a good basketball player and a great kid. My team captain and the glue that held my girls' basketball team together, H underwent gender-affirming surgery in the summer between junior and senior year. And just like that, I had to figure out new ways to navigate this once familiar relationship that we had developed since 8th grade. I mean, H literally knew what I was gonna say before I said it. Because as a coach, I had habits to project strength and decisiveness, especially when I was unsure. But I no longer needed to be the expert in the center of the huddle. H was the expert, and I was the learner. So, to show the support that I always had, I needed to learn how to show up in ways that I never had. And I couldn't rely on willpower alone to get me there. Because willpower, like any other muscle, can get exhausted. And the more stressed we are, well, the more we rely on habit. So eventually, habit trumps willpower every time. And it was knowing this and knowing how important that relationship was to me that I decided to pull out the big guns, right? I said, hey, we're gonna fight habit with habit. I focused on elevating 2 behaviors until they became habits. The first was asking for real-time feedback in the moment. especially when I didn't want to hear it. The second, that was fact-checking my narrative, or just taking a minute to say what I was thinking or name my understanding and make sure I had it right before jumping in with action or advice. Schwartz's theory of attention density argues that where we put our attention to shifts the way our brain sees and interacts with the world. I put attention to just 2 behaviors, less than a minute each to implement. But once they became habits, they conveyed to H in each interaction that he was safe and that I was invested in the future of our relationship. Now, thus far, I've talked about schools. I've talked explicitly to educators. But I'm looking at your faces and I'm seeing you've been paying attention. And if you've really been paying attention, right about now is the part where you start thinking, wait a minute, this might not just be an education talk. Because this is bigger than that. This is an everybody problem, and let me tell you why. Because unlike H, most people's change, you can't see from the outside. But we can all relate to that feeling of a relationship just growing apart. Well, what if it didn't have to? What if instead of the unconscious habits that push people away when we change or when they change, our habits affirmed identities? You see, I believe that we must intentionally develop semi-automatic, interpersonal behaviors that signal belonging within and across identity markers. What if our legacy was culturally responsive habits? Because the culturally responsive habits that I developed for the classroom, they didn't stay there. They're at the center of all of my relationships. And because I allow people the space to be vulnerable and valued, to be imperfect and still irreplaceable, I'm a better educator, I'm a better partner, I'm a better friend, I'm a better father. At home, I get the opportunity to show confidence in my son's abilities as he tests the growing limits of his mind, his body, my patience. He's 4.5, he's right here in the front row. But even discipline is an opportunity for connection when it's housed in the high expectations of our family and the gentle reminder that because my son is part of that special group, he can reach those expectations. Because whether or not I'm explicitly teaching, my son, like all of our children, is always watching and learning. And the culturally responsive habits he inherits from me will allow him to one day create connections across diversity, because that's exactly what they were designed to do. If we're gonna make a better world for all of our children, well, then first, we have to acknowledge the weight of recent years. Take a breath, it's been hard. But more importantly, we have to take accountability for the collective cost of the walls our habits have built. In 2022, the National Vital Statistics System recorded nearly 50,000 suicides. Since COVID-19, the CDC has seen a rise in the number of adults taking prescriptions for anxiety and depression each year. And in 2023, a study titled "The State of American Men" found that 65% of men 18 to 23 say that no one knows them well. I'll give those numbers a minute to sink in. Because those numbers, they're important. They tell our story. But the good news is, there's good news. The good news is that they don't yet have the ending. You see, just the time that I've been on stage, thousands of people have met and engaged in relationship for the first time. It's happening in this very room. And at their core, every relationship is a bid to love and be loved, to see and be seen. So, as I leave this stage, what I want you to know is what I didn't know all those years ago. Whether or not your relationships matter, it's not your choice, my friends. It's your habits. Thank you.